So are you a Java developer and you are working on Servlet and JSP, maybe Stur's framework? And if you are looking for some simple solution, here we are. So we are talking about Spring MVC. So welcome to Telusko Learnings. My name is Navin Reddy and let's talk about Spring MVC now. So what exactly Spring MVC is? You might have heard about this from lots of people. Let's move to Spring MVC. Let's learn Spring MVC. So why everyone is moving to Spring MVC? It's because it is damn easy to work with. Okay. So there are lots of reasons why we are going for Spring MVC. The first one is it is easy to learn. Second, it provides you that flexibility that you can change anything anytime. And third, the separation of concerns or separation of the modules. Example, we have different views, we have different models, and then we have different services to work with. Spring provides you all those features. And if you have already worked on Spring, you know the power of Spring, right? And this is Spring MVC. Now, when we talk about Spring MVC, we can create amazing websites using Spring MVC. I mean, nothing different from what we do in Servlet and JSP, but doing the same thing in a very effective way, right? Now, if you remember, when you worked with servlets, what you have did is you have created the servlet class, and then you say extend HTTP servlet, then you have to create a method which is service, right? And then you send a request. So client sends the request, goes to server, and that's how it works. How Spring MVC works is, again, when you learn these things, you might find it a bit difficult to grasp everything, but trust me, if you make one simple application or even a small code in Spring MVC, after that, if you want to expand it, it is very easy. So let's start with it. So let's try to understand the architecture or how exactly Spring MVC works. So just for that, what we'll do is, let's imagine we have certain controllers here. Okay, so we have certain controllers, right? So if you go to your server technology, every servlet behaves like a controller, right? And your JSP behaves like a view. So let's say we have certain controllers here. Now what controllers I'm talking about, let's say we have a login controller, we have a logout controller, we have add controller, we have multiplication controller. So let's say we have these 4 controllers here. From the client side, when client sends the request goes to your favorite file, which is web.xml file, right? In that XML file we mentioned for which request you want to call which controller, right? That's what we do in your normal server technology in Servlet MVC, right? But so the problem is, if you have lots of controllers, sometimes it's difficult to manage all the controllers, right? Let's say we have 15, we have 100 controllers. So it is difficult to manage all the controllers. Second, each servlet will behave like one controller. We wanted something called as multi-action controller. For that, again, Spring MVC will help you. So if you try to convert the same architecture in Spring MVC, what we can do is, we have a client machine here. Client machine sends the request to the server and server says, okay, now we are not using normal MVC. We want to use Spring MVC. That means to handle all this controller, we need one more controller who will be the front controller. Okay, so with all these controllers, we have one more controller, that is your front controller. Then you will think, okay, now we have to provide one more controller. No, you don't have to do that. Spring MVC will create a controller for you. You just have to create your controllers, but the front controller will be given by Spring MVC. Now that front controller in Spring MVC is called as DispatcherServlet. That means all the client request which goes to web XML file should know that you are using Spring MVC, and all the requests should go to your front controller, which is your dispatcher servlet. How can you mention that? So it's very simple. In your web XML file, just mention that for all the requests, you have to send the request to dispatcher servlet. It's that simple, right? Again, you know how to do it, right? You can create a servlet tag, you can create a servlet mapping tag, and you can do that. Now, once your request goes to dispatcher servlet, then what? Now, dispatcher servlet will think, okay, the request is for login. I should call a login servlet. I mean, I want to call a login controller, right? Request is for add, so you have to call add controller. Request is for logout, you have to call logout controller. So your dispatcher servlet should know which one to call. But then there is one more issue here. The issue is, how would your dispatcher servlet knows which controller to call? Now your dispatcher servlet is not a Superman, right? It will know everything. So what happens is, when request goes to web XML file, it sends your request to dispatcher servlet. Now dispatcher servlet needs a configuration file. So in that file, you have to mention which request to call which controller. But then you will say that's not good, right? Because we were very happy with servlets, no need to that, no need for that extra file. But hold on, Spring MVC provides you something called as annotations. So all your controllers should be annotated with the help of controller. So we have to use a controller annotation, and that's it. So with that controller annotation, every controller will have some mapping steps. Again, we will see that when we do programming or the practical implementation. But every controller will have a mapping, right? You have to only mention in that configuration file that in which package you have all your configuration, and you're done. I mean, in which package you have all your controllers. Of course, right, these are Java files, so you'll be having all this thing in one particular package, right, or maybe multiple packages. So you just have to mention which package you're working with. That's it. DispatcherServlet will specify, okay, we have to go to this package to find the controllers. You don't have to do that. It will be done by your Spring MVC. Okay, so let me repeat. Client sends a request goes to WebXML file says, okay, we have to send all the requests to the DispatcherServlet, and DispatcherServlet will check the configuration file and check, okay, we have to send that request to login controller. Now that login controller will do some processing, of course, right? When you call a method, it is done for with the help of it is done for the processing, right? So after the processing, as a client, what you need? Some page, right? So that controller will return you a page. Not exactly. That controller will give you the name of the page, because it might happen that you have lots of pages, right? So when you say you are building a website, you will be having lots of views, right? When you say views, I'm talking about the pages which a client sees, right? So there will be lots of pages. Which page to call? That's a question. Second, see, we have a page, right? It needs two things. First, which page to call. Second, what is the data? Now data will be generated by your controller, but which page to call? You have to mention that in your controller. It will mention the page name, it will mention the data. That data and the page name goes to the DispatcherServlet, again your front controller. You see that? It's not directly controller to page, it is through DispatcherServlet. So the controller will send the response to the DispatcherServlet. Now DispatcherServlet will get two things, the data and the view name. It will call that particular view, okay, and it will also add, so your view technology will fetch the data from the controller. Make sense? And then that page goes from DispatcherServlet to the client, and if you can see, everything is done by DispatcherServlet. As a client, you're only interacting with your front controller. You don't even know how many controllers you have on the backend side, right? Everything is done by your front controller. Then you will think, you know, everything is good, but why do we need, why your DispatcherServlet should know which view to call? It's because it may happen that, so let's say for time being you're using JSP as your view technology. In future, if you want to change your view technology, let's say you want to use ThemeLeaf, if you want to use maybe some other velocity or free marker, if you want to use all this view technology, you just have to change the configuration file. You just have to change the configuration file for the DispatcherServlet, right? You can change it from JSP to ThemeLeaf like this. Change your views and just change the configuration. Your controllers will not even know which technology, which view technology you're working. So that is a separation of concern. Your controllers don't know what view we are using, and your view technology don't know what controllers we are using. It's that awesome, it's that flexible, right? So Spring MVC is awesome. There are lots of features. You know, I feel Spring MVC is like a magic, and as a developer we are magician, right? So it's an amazing technology to know more how to do all this request mapping and how to work with the controllers, how to create this configuration file, how to get a client, we already know. We'll see all those things in the practical session. In this video we'll talk about how to create a simple Spring MVC application. So as we progress in this video or in the tutorial, we'll first create a simple MVC application, which is Spring MVC application. Then we'll move towards the complex part of it. Then we'll move towards how to deploy that app on OpenShift server. So before knowing how to, or before starting with this video, there are some prerequisites. First, you should know what is Spring core. Okay, so basics of Spring. I'm not saying you have to be expert in Spring, but the basics of Spring will do. Second, you should know what is Maven, or even if you don't know Maven, you can just pause this video, go back to this channel. In that channel, I have one video on MVC. In fact, I have two videos on Maven, so you can refer those videos and come back to this video. Maven is not that difficult. Even if you don't know Maven, I will give you some glimpse of it in this video, but just to make you more comfortable, you can watch that video. Now let's create an application. Initially you will find it a bit difficult to understand why we have all this flow, but trust me, once you learn this concept, once you create your own example or own implementation for this Spring MVC, it will be awesome. You'll love this concept. So let's start with the application itself without wasting any more time. So let's create a new project. Now basically, whenever you say you want to create a new project for web, so since Spring MVC is a web framework, right? So instead of directly creating a web project, since we want the project structure, we want lots of libraries for Spring. So instead of going for normal project, we'll directly go for a Maven project. So Maven is a build tool. So using Maven, you'll be getting lots of libraries from Maven repository. You'll be getting a project structure, what you need. And even if you in future, if you want to add a new library, you can simply edit your the configuration file. You will get new libraries. Again, how to do that we'll see in the video. So just select Maven project here and say next. Now it will ask you for a default location. We'll set the default location as it is. Now in this you will be getting lots of options. So whenever you see a term called as archetype in Maven, this is a project structure, or you can see the architecture. Now if you want to create a simple core Java application, you can select archetype quick start, or if you want to create a web application, you can select archetype web app. Okay, since we want to create a web application here, we'll select web app. Okay, now let's go for next. It will ask you for a project it will ask you for a group ID. So group ID is basically a package name. Okay, so you can mention any package name here. So we'll say com.telusko. Since I have doing this project, maybe I have done this two, three times. That's why I'm getting this com.telusko. For your project, you will get is blank. So make sure you enter or whatever the package name you want. Next is artifact ID. Here you have to mention your project name. So we'll say this project is maybe demo MVC. Okay, just for you can have any name. We'll say demo MVC here, and then click on finish. Now once you click on finish, it will create your project. This is a Java web project which is built using Maven. So this is the Maven structure here. Okay, and this is the most important file for Maven, which is pom.xml, which stands for project object model. Now you can see there are some errors. Now since this is a web application, you need a web server. So I need to link my application with a web server. So I have to right click here and go to properties. There will be option of targeted runtimes. Now we have so I have already have a Apache Tomcat version 8.0. If you don't have any web server, you can simply click on new. It will give you some choice here, Tomcat 7, Tomcat 6, depending upon your Eclipse version. So check the suitable Tomcat version available, then click on next. It will give you option of you can download Tomcat from internet and you can simply browse it to link. Otherwise, you can, if you don't want to do all those tasks by yourself, you can just click on download and install. It will automatically download the Apache Tomcat version, and you can directly link it, and that's it. You will get this. You will get a runtime here. Since I already have a runtime here, I will check it, and okay. So once I click on OK, you can see we don't have any errors now. This is the main file. You have the main folder. In this you'll be having two things. One is your web app and resources. You can also create a Java file. In this web app, I already have index.jsp page. Just to verify that everything is working fine, I will run this application. I will say run on server. Okay, I have to choose the server here. I will click on next so that so the app is there. click on finish. It will ask you to restart the server. It will take some time depending upon your machine speed. And you can see we got the output as hello world. Now I don't want to view it in an internal browser. So this is the internal browser for Eclipse. I want to view this in the external browser, which is the browser for maybe Google Chrome or Firefox. So I will simply say window, web browser. I will select default web browser, which is my Chrome, if I'm not wrong. Again, if I run this application, click on finish. Okay, let me close my other things here. Okay, so that's hello world here, right? So we got hello world. Now, I want to add some more functionality. I want to create a simple, maybe simple calculator or all those things. So before doing that, what we need is to, when you do something in Java, so we require some Java code, right? So let's say you want to add two numbers, so you have to of course insert a Java code, but it's always recommended to not use Java code inside JSP page. We need to create a servlet, right, for that processing. But why to create a servlet when you create a normal Pojo, and you can convert that Pojo into servlet later on? So how to create that class which will do this processing is, let me first create a form here. Okay, so let me create a form. So how to create a form? We'll say it is a form. Okay, and it will have two input. We'll say input type equal to text. We'll name this as t1, which will take the first value. I also need a break tag just so that I will see the next tag in the new line. I will say input type equal to again text, and we'll say name equal to t2, and that's br. Cool. But we also need a button in which if you click on that button, it will call this second page. So we'll say submit. We don't have to mention the name, it will directly take the submit name as it is. And whenever I click on this button, I need to call a servlet, right? We'll name timebin, will name that servlet as maybe add something. Okay, something in that add. But we need to mention the extension also, right? So we'll simply, or we'll not mention extension now, we'll mention extension later. Okay, so we need to call add. So maybe this add is a servlet. Now what next? Now in order to convert your project into MVC application or Spring MVC application, you have to do some the extra stuff. Okay, so to do that extra stuff, we need to first configure your project into a Spring MVC project. So it will take some time to configure your project. So what we'll do is we'll do it in the next video. Okay, in the next video we'll configure your normal project, which is the normal project, into a Spring MVC project. Okay, so time being, so complete this work, then go for the, or you can just implement this thing in your own laptop, then we'll move towards the next video so that you can follow me on. Now, what's difference between your normal MVC and Spring MVC? So in normal MVC, what we have is we have a model, we have view, and we have a controller. So whenever you send a request to a web server, the request will be processed by your controller. Now controller will ask data from the database or from some other resources in the format of a model, and the data will be displayed on a page which will be called as view. So you send request to a controller, you generate data in a model format, you send that data to the view so that you can show all the data. Now, if we talk about if we talk about normal MVC, so you have a model, you have a controller. So you always imagine you have one controller. But if we talk about very big applications, huge applications, in that you might need multiple controllers to work with multiple views. So for different tasks, we'll be having different controllers. Now, when you send a request, who is responsible to accept your request? I mean, how will they know what you want? So let's say you want to add two numbers. So there will be a specific controller to add two numbers. Let's say you want to log into a system. There will be a different controller to log into your system. If let's say you want to log out, again there will be a different controller to do that task for you. So you'll be having different controllers. So you cannot send a request to multiple controllers at the same time. So for all those controllers, you will be having a main controller, which will be also called as front controller. So you have to send a request to a front controller. Now front controller will decide, okay, depending upon your request, it will check your request and it will send the request to the particular controller. Now to achieve that, we have to first define who is your controller here. And to define this, whenever you click on a submit button here, the request will go to web.xml file, right? So you have to mention the thing here, you have to mention where you want to send your request. So you cannot directly send your request to a particular controller. You have to use a front controller. Now what is front controller? So in Spring MVC, that front controller is called a DispatcherServlet. Okay. Now this DispatcherServlet is a servlet, of course. So we have to send your request to this servlet. And to do that, we need to type the redirect data here, which is servlet tags. Now instead of wasting my time in typing that, I already created a cheat code here, or cheat sheet you can say. I will be uploading this cheat sheet on my website, and you can directly go to this go to my website and you can copy this. I will provide a link in description area. So let me just copy this thing. So this is my changes. So I have to mention Spring Dispatcher Servlet here, which is org.springframework.web.servlet DispatcherServlet. So whenever you send any request, so when I say I have to send any request, so whenever I send any request here, which is / for all the request, I need to call DispatcherServlet. Now DispatcherServlet will take care for the further processing. Okay, so we need to mention this thing. So we have to mention a servlet tag and a servlet mapping, which simply means for all the requests you have to call DispatcherServlet. Now just point one thing, we have a servlet name which is Telusko. Again, what's the importance of this name we'll see later, but time being, just remember we have something called Telusko as a servlet name. Perfect. Now if we talk about this class which is DispatcherServlet, is it a part of Tomcat? And the answer is no, this is not a part of Tomcat. So in order to use this class, we need to add some libraries. So from where you will get these libraries, you have to go to Spring website. So you have to say spring.io. In that spring.io, this is the official website for Spring. Then you have to go to project section. Then you have to go for Spring Framework. You'll be getting all your libraries here. So which is your Spring MVC, right? Which is, we are going for Spring MVC. So we cannot download those libraries here. The only way to get Spring libraries is we have to use Maven. Okay, so what I will do to add those libraries in your project, you have to use this file which is pom.xml, which is POM file. In this you will be having lots of things. We are not concerned about all these things. We are only concerned about the dependencies. So whenever you need something in your project, you have to add some type of dependencies in your project. So let's say you want a JUnit library, so you have to add this dependency with the version name. Let's say you want to add MySQL connector for database connectivity, so you have to add one more dependency. So instead of typing all the dependency, again I have a cheat sheet in which I have already entered some dependency. So I will just copy these dependencies. Again, I will let you know what are the dependencies are. So let me copy this and paste. So the dependencies we need here, the first one is JUnit. In order to test your application. In this I will not test anything, so we don't require this, but let's keep it there. Second, you require your Spring MVC libraries. So this is your Spring MVC library. Next we need, maybe in future if you want to connect your application with database, so we require this dependency. Now you may need to work with JSTL, which is Java JSP standard tag libraries. We have to use this library here. Okay, so again you will get all this thing in the cheat sheet. Now once you say save, it will download all the libraries from internet, okay, or the Maven repository. Since I have already done this project earlier, so I have a local repository for that, so that's why it was damn fast to download all those libraries. If you're doing for this for the first time, it will take some time for you to download, so you can see your progress in this section, the right section. Cool. Let me just show you that how it works. So if I say 4.11, I hope we have some type of version there. So you can see this type of progress will be there. Okay. Let's go back to 3.8.1 if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So once we have entered this, so whenever you click on a button, whenever you click on a submit button, it will call it will go to web.xml file which says for all the requests you have to call DispatcherServlet, and then you will get DispatcherServlet from this file. We don't want POM file. Now DispatcherServlet needs to send that request to some class, right? So we need to create that class here. So we'll go to main. We'll say new simple Java class. I will say simple class. Where's class here? So we have a class. We'll click on next, and we need to provide a name. We'll provide first package. We'll say com.telusko. Okay, And in this, I will provide a particular name. So name of my controller will be, let's say, add controller. Okay, and we'll click on finish. Now this controller is responsible to add two numbers. Okay, now I will create a method here which is public void add, which will add two numbers. Okay, and so time bin will not take any values, just print the output. So I will simply say sysout. Oh, error. So it is sysout. There's something wrong with my Eclipse. Yeah, sysout, and will say I am here. Okay, so that at least if I run this application, it should print ham here, right? So if I run this, if I click on submit button, and if I the request, let's run this. Why to talk all this thing? Let's run. Restart the server. Okay, so we have a form. Let me just zoom in this thing. Okay, so let me enter two values, 7 and 8. Doesn't matter. It will not add those values. But if I click on submit, oh, we got an error. Error says file not found. So you can see again, lots of people hate errors, but you know, these are the good things to learn new things. So always go to the root cause and search for the error. So it says nested exception, which is java.io.file not found exception. Okay, so we are missing with some file, and the file is this one, Telusko-servlet.xml. Now what is this file? This file is basically, whenever you run this application, whenever your request goes to web.xml, it will go to DispatcherServlet. But DispatcherServlet is a configurable class. So your DispatcherServlet should know whenever you call for add, you need to call this method. Now how to teach DispatcherServlet how to do that? So we need to create a new file, which is a configuration file for DispatcherServlet, and the type of file will be XML. We'll get XML file here, and then we need to mention a file name. But what should be the file name? So it says the file name should be Telusko-servlet.xml. We'll enter this name. Again, we'll see why to enter that name. So it is Telusko-servlet.xml. Okay, so we got a file here, but why this file name, Telusko-servlet? So your file name, your configuration file name should be something hyphen, it should be something hyphen servlet.xml. So this thing is confirmed. This should be fixed. You need to change this. Now this thing is depend upon your servlet name. So I hope you remember, I have talked about, I have already told you about this. You have to remember this part, Telusko. So since this is Telusko, so this should be Telusko. So that should be your file name. Okay. Now once you got this file name, we have to configure this servlet. We need to add some bin thing. Again, instead of typing all those things, I have a cheat sheet here. Let me just copy this part and paste. Now it will specify what to do. So whenever I call for add, my Spring MVC need to search for a package which is what's my package name? com.telusko. Okay, so it need to search for this package which is com.telusko. I'm also saying that it should work with annotation configuration. So in the last video, we have seen how to create this file, which is servlet.xml file. Now you can see we are getting some error here, and the error is because of this double quotes. So let me change this double quote to a proper double quotes, because I have copied this from my other file. There was some error. So make sure you have the proper double quotes format there, and you can see we have resolved that error. Now even if you run this, there might be some error. Let me check what's the error. So if I say finish run, it will take some time to load. And okay, let me close all the other files. And if I expand this, let's say 7 and 6, if I say submit, okay, it's again have given me the error which is 404. So whenever you see 404, it is actually file not found, and it's not able to map the HTTP request with the URI. The problem is whenever you call add, how would your application knows which method to call? So in order to make this as a controller, we have to use some sort of annotations. So we have to use annotation here, which is controller. Okay, so we have to use a controller annotation which defines that this is a controller, and you need to also mention the request, for which request you are executing this method. And to specify every time you call add, you need to execute this method. We have to say, we need to use an annotation which is called as RequestMapping annotation. And in this RequestMapping annotation, we have to mention in double quotes, we'll mention for add request, you have to call this method called as add. we don't have to have the same name, add and add. You can have any name provided you're calling that particular name here, a URL. And now if you run this, I think we need to restart the server. Restart. It will take some time. And let's try this once again. If I say run this, okay, so we got something and we got an error. So it is something with the view resolver, that's a different thing. But what we wanted is to print I am here, right? We got something. So since we are printing I am here, we got I am here. Simple. So that's how you can map your application from a HTML page or a JSP page to a controller. But hold on, we don't want to show the output on the console. We want to show the output on the JSP page or a page, right? So for that, what we need to call a page here. Now how to call a page? To call a page, first you have to create a page. So let's create a page and we'll name this page as, we'll say this page as maybe display.jsp. Okay, let's make this small. So we got a page here which is display.jsp. In this page, let me print I am here. That's it. I'm printing I am here. Now, how to call this page? Now, in order to call this page, what you can simply do is, instead of returning a void, we can mention I'm returning a string. Okay, and here we have to say return, and you have to mention the name of the file, which is display.jsp. So this will call display.jsp. Okay, so whenever you call add, it will call display.jsp. Let's run this and boom. So you got a page which is display.jsp, and you can see it's written I am here. Now the amazing thing about this is, even if you're passing numbers, we are not accepting those numbers. But instead of printing here add dot or something, what you say, display.jsp, we are printing add. So we are actually hiding what type of technology we are using. But we don't want this output. We want to add two numbers, right? And how to add that two numbers, we'll see in the next part. So in the last video we have seen we got this output which is I'm here, right? Now we don't want to print I'm here. We want to print the output of the addition of 7 and 6. So for that, what we do is, first we need to take the values from the user. So whenever you enter values here in T1, T2, you're calling this controller which is add. Okay. Now we need to take the values. So if you have to say int I, it will take your first value. So if you are comfortable with Servlet and JSP, you might be knowing this. So you have to take input using request.getParameter. I will say pass int, and here we have to mention request.getParameter. So get parameter, and we have to provide our brackets. And in this bracket, you have to mention the name of your field, which is T1, and we are getting an error. So this error is, what is the request object? So first we have to create the request object, and we can create that request object in this add method. So we need to create two objects here, as we create in do get do post in Servlet. So we have to say http servlet request, which is, we'll say request object, comma http servlet response, which is we'll name this as response object. So we need to create these two objects here. Okay, let me import the package for request also. Now you can use this request object. Now same thing you have to do for the second variable, which is j. So which is int j equal to, and this will be 2. Now once we got these two values, let's add those values. We'll say one more variable, k equal to I plus j. Now once we got these two values, we need to send this value to this display page. Okay. Now how to send that value? To send the value, we need to use something called as model object. Okay. Now, how to use model object? So we have to create something called as model and view object. So model and view is a class, and we'll say MV equal to new model and view. So using model and view, you can pass the data which you have generated. So we have generated our data which is k. So you can pass this value using model and view object. Now whenever you work with model and view object, we need to specify two things. First thing will be mv.set view name, which view you want to call. So we have to say display.jsp, it's your view. The second thing is what data you need to pass. So we have to say mv dot. So in order to add data, we need to say add object, and every object will have two things. First will be the label for the object. We'll say label is result, and the data is k. So we want to send this k to the page. Now since we are using ModelAndView object, we should not return a string. We need to return something called as MV object, which is ModelAndView object. Now since we are returning MV object, instead of string we'll mention ModelAndView. The type we have to mention there. Cool. Now using this we can pass the data to the view. Now let's see how to add that thing in, or how to fetch that value here. So we need to type something called as result is, and then give a colon. Now that object or the value belongs to request object. So we need to fetch value from request object. We'll be using expression here, and we'll say request dot get attribute, and we have to mention something called as result here. Simple. And once you do these changes, let's go back to your Eclipse or your browser, refresh. We'll pass two values 3 or 4 and 5. We'll click on submit, and the answer you got is result is 9. So that's how you create a simple MVC application in Spring. So that's your Spring MVC. So stay tuned. In the further tutorials, we'll talk about some extra annotations extra annotation you should know about Spring MVC. Now once we got this output, which is addition of two numbers, so this was the output we got, which is result is 13, right? So let me close all extra tags here. Okay, so this is what we were getting, right? Let me run this again so that I will show you the output. Okay, it's taking some time. So let me pass two values here, which is 7 and 8, and you're getting the output as 15, right? Now there is one more way of writing this code. So instead of specifying the request.get attribute, we can actually use something called as EL. So EL stands for expression language. So how to use EL? So we have to use a dollar symbol and curly brackets. We have to mention the name of your label, which is result. So if you see this, we have result, and then here also you have to mention result. Okay, now let's run this. Let's see what happens if I run this code. So let me enter two values 9 and 8. If I say submit, it says result is in dollar result. We want the output, not this part, right? The problem is there are multiple times where EL is not supported. So first is maybe your Tomcat, your web server is not supporting EL, or you're using a servlet version which is below 2.4. I'm using 3.0. So you might be using a servlet version below 2.4, or maybe your JSP page has actually ignored all the expression language. So how to enable that? So in the page section, we can use something called as is EL ignored. So by default it is false, but in my machine it is true now. So what I will do it is again false. I don't want to ignore EL. So you just have to add this line if you are getting error. And let's go back to the code. Let's run this, and you got the error. You got the output, which is result is 17. Cool. So that's how you have to use EL here. Now what we'll do next is we'll be creating an application, a login form in Spring MVC. Okay, so I hope you got the basic idea about Spring MVC. So whenever you try to, we can do one more thing here. What we can do is, whenever you talk about web applications, so we'll be having multiple layers. So this is your controller layer. So when you're adding two values, we should not add values inside your controller. So all the logical processing should be done in something called as service method. So how to use service? So we have to, service class. So we have to create a new class here. We'll name this class as add service, and make sure it belongs to a different package. We'll say package name is com.telusko.service. Okay, and in this service we'll be having a method which is called as public int add, which will take two parameters, and it will return one parameter. We'll say return I plus j. Okay, and in this controller what we can do is, instead of creating object, we can we have to create object of add service here. So you have to say add service. We'll name this as as equal to new add service, and then we'll be using we need to import the package. So we'll say control space. So there are two ways of importing the package. Go to the class and then say control space, that's one way. Or second way is you can type control shift O. If you're a Mac user, you can type command shift O, okay? And we'll fetch that value, we'll say int k equal to as dot add it, we have to pass two values, and then it will add your values and you will get the output. Now you will say to add two numbers, we have to create a new class altogether. See, in your real life project, you will be not building addition code or calculator. You will be doing something very big, right? Maybe you are creating a login form. Maybe you have to fetch the current stock market price. So you can ask your service class to do that for you. Okay, so this, if you are fetching stock market price, this will not be only one line. This will be maybe 50 to 40 to 50 lines. In this video, we'll talk about Spring MVC with annotations. So what we have done is this JSP page in which we are asking for two numbers. When you click on this button submit, it will send a add request by sending these two values. So you can see in the address bar, we are sending a add request here, and then we are sending these two values. So as soon as you send a request, the request will go to your web.xml file, right? So that's the main file. So that's your deployment descriptor. So if you have the idea about how Servlet works, so when you send a request goes to your web.xml file in which you map the request. So for all the requests, which means when you say slash, it means for all the requests, the request should go to DispatcherServlet, which means you don't want your normal web XML to handle your request. You want Spring Framework to handle all the requests. As soon as you forward the request to DispatcherServlet, it will try to access this file, which is Telusko-servlet.xml. Now, why this file name should be like this? The file name should be something-servlet.xml. So since we are writing servlet name as Telusko, it should be Telusko-servlet.xml. If it is ABC, it could be abc-servlet.xml. In this, what we are doing is we are saying that all the requests will be mapped with the help of components. Okay, so it will be on annotation configuration. So you will get all your controllers in this package, which is com.telusko, right? So let's go back to our class, which is add controller. So in this package, which is com.telusko, we have a controller, right, in which you have a method which is trying to map a request. So let's say when you send an add request, it will get mapped here. Well, let's say when you're sending a different request, let's say that's a subtraction request. For that, you need to create another method. We'll name that method as sub, and we'll pass the same parameters request response so that we can fetch the values. And then we can actually set the, we can do the processing there, and we can return the value. Now, since we are sending an add request, this thing will work here, right? So what we want to achieve now is we want to make this as annotation based configuration. So you will say, okay, it is already configured with annotations, right? Since we are using annotations here, so we have an annotation here, we have an annotation here, but somewhere we are using XML, right? So this file, which is the Spring MVC configuration file, so this is basically a DispatcherServlet configuration file in which you have to mention the controller names, but since we are working with annotations, so we are not mentioning anything here. Then why to even use this XML file? Can we replace this? Okay, that's one. So we need to replace this XML file. Second, this one. Since we are working with a Servlet version which is above 3.1, so if I go to properties, I don't know where it will be mentioned. I think it will be in, where it will be, let's search. So somewhere it will mention that we are using a Servlet version which is more than 3.1. I don't know where it is. It should be somewhere, is it run? No, okay, oh, that's weird. But we have mentioned somewhere that we are working with a Servlet version which is more than 3, which is 3. In fact, I guess I'm working with 3.1. So whenever you're working with a Servlet version which is above 3, you can use something called as annotation configuration. Now, how to specify that you are using annotation here? First, we'll replace this file here, which is Telusko-servlet.xml. Now, how to replace this file? First, we have to create a class. So to replace this, we'll say right-click class, and we'll name this class as, we can name it anything we want, but here we'll mention it as Telusko config. Okay, we can give any name. So we'll say Telusko config. We'll click on finish. Now, as soon as you create this class, you have to make this class as a configuration class. So in order to make this as a configuration class, since this is a configuration file, right, we are mentioning all the configuration here, we need to make this class as configuration. To do that, we have to use an annotation called as @configuration, okay, because this is a configuration. The next thing we have to mention here is what? We need to mention that we need to scan the components. So we can do that with the help of @ComponentScan, right? And in bracket we can specify the package in which you have this. So we can mention multiple packages. That's why it allows you to put an array so that we can put multiple packages. So we'll say what's the package name? It is Telusko, right? So we have the package name as com.telusko. So let's say you have one more package in which you have a component. So you can just give a comma here and you can add one more component there. And that's it. It's so simple, right? So this is what we have done in this XML file. So now even if you remove this file, it will work. Okay, we'll do that once we have done all the configuration. We'll remove all those two files. We'll try to run this. So once we have done for this DispatcherServlet configuration, let's replace this XML thing. So to remove web.xml, we can create a class specifically if you are working with a servlet version which is more than 3. So we can create a class and we'll name this class as myWebInitializer. You can name it anything you want, okay? But you need to make sure that you are extending a class which is called as abstract. I don't know, it will be here. So it will be abstract annotation configuration DispatcherServlet initializer. I know this is a very big name, right? So this is a class name. You need to extend this class to achieve that feature, and again it is only present in Spring Framework. Okay, so for that you need to extend all the Spring Framework files. So click on finish. It will give you this class which is myWebInitializer, and you need to extend this class which is abstract annotation configuration DispatcherServlet initializer. I know it's a very big name, right? So let's ignore that part. So what we need to do here is we'll ignore these two things. Should we ignore those two things? Okay, we can do that. We need to set this mapping first. So in XML file we are setting the mapping, right? So for all the requests. So here also we need to mention that. How can you mention? Since you are doing a string of array, we'll create a string of array here by setting some values. Since we have only one request type, so we'll give slash. So for all the requests, we have to call DispatcherServlet. And how to mention that? So we need to mention this file name, right? So we need to mention Telusko configuration here. And to do that, we need to use a method which is not root. We need to mention it here. So let me remove this. And instead of this null, we need to return, since we have to return a class array, right? So we'll say this is class array. So we can specify class array in which we can mention multiple classes. So we'll say this is my class name is configuration Telusko config.class, right? Which is that simple. So by creating these two files, which is Telusko config and myWebInitializer, what we are doing is it's not compulsory to use web.xml and these two files. So what we can, at least we'll remove this. We'll say delete. Okay, and one more thing. Let's not remove XML. Let's remove this stuff here. Since we are not mentioning that part, so it will not get activated. Your myWebInitializer will work here. Let's try. Since we are changing lots of stuff, let's restart the server once. That's my Tomcat. So I'm restoring the server now. So what we have done here is we have removed the XML configuration, and now we are using annotation based configuration. So this is for DispatcherServlet and this is for XML, web.xml file. So I guess my server is restarted. It's done. Let's run this file. It's index.jsp, and you can see it's here. Let me enter those two values, 4 and 7, submit, and we got the answer. We got the answer without any XML file, and that's the power of annotation based configuration. Sounds good, right? We can do one more thing here, which we have not covered in the XML configurations. See, I'm calling this display.jsp page, right, which is here. So we are calling this page which is display.jsp, in which you are mentioning the extension, right? So what happens when we work with Spring MVC is, we should not mention the extension name here. The thing is, In future, you may want to change to a different view technology. So now you're working with JSP. Maybe in future you want to work with free marker, you want to work with velocity. So you don't want to mention the extension here. So even if you are changing from JSP to JSF, you just have to mention display here. Somewhere you have to mention that you are working with .jsf or .jsp. How can you do that is in your web initializer, in your Telusko configuration, we can mention a method here. We can mention that public. We need to create an object of internal view resolver. So internal view resolver or internal resource view resolver is responsible to search for the view name. So as a controller, you will just mention I want to call display. What display? Maybe JSP, maybe .jsf, doesn't matter. We want a page with the name display. So it is our responsibility to mention the extension. The second thing is, let's say this display page is not inside web app, it is inside web.inf. So we are trying to hide that file. So we are making this file as private. So no one can access that file directly now, right? So for that we need to create a method which will return internal, so that's internal resource view resolver, okay, and we can give any method name, that's okay. We can say this is view resolver, and here we'll try to return the object of internal view resolver. First we have to create that object here, so we'll say internal view resolver, internal resource view resolver. We'll name this as vr equal to new internal resource view resolver. Once we got this object, we'll say return vr, okay, but before returning we have to specify two things: the path where you have your JSP files, and second stuff, we have to mention the extension. So how to specify that? So you have to say vr.setPrefix. So to set the path, we have to specify the prefix. So we'll say it is inside a web.inf folder, web-inf, okay, and the extension, so we have to say, you guessed it right, so we have to use suffix, and that should be .jsp. So let's say in future if you want to change it to .jsf, you just need to come to your configuration, just make it .jsf, it will work, okay, or not exactly .jsf, you have to make it .xhtml, right? That's how your JSF works. Now since we are following annotations, we need to specify that this will give you an object of internal view resolver. For that we need to use one more annotation, which is add bean. So if you're not clear what is add bean annotation, you can just check my Spring core annotation video. I will try to make the link in the description area. So you make sure you watch that video if you want to know about how add bean annotation works. Okay. So now we are not mentioning the extension, so you're just mentioning display. Okay, let me just make it display one just for the experiment, and let me run this file. Let's see what happens. It should give you an error because we don't have any file name called display1.jsp. That's what we are expecting, right? So let me say 33 and 5 submit. So you can see we got the error. So it is searching for a file which is display1.jsp, and see in which folder it is web.inf, right? So where we have mentioned that, we have mentioned that thing here. So search in the folder which is web.inf with the extension .jsp. We are not mentioning any path, any extension here. Okay, just to make it work, we'll say display. Okay, let's go back, refresh the page. Is it refreshing? Yes. Refresh done, submit, and you got the output. Simple. So that's how we can achieve Spring MVC with the help of annotation configuration. Okay, there are some more annotations. So what you can do is we can do some more stuff here. In this video, we'll talk about a new annotation which is RequestParam. So why we require RequestParam here? So let me run this code now. So while running, okay, it will take some time to load. So it's running. So it will open in Firefox now. So you can see when I type a number which is 5 and 8, and if I click on the submit query, in this address bar we are sending the name of the request, which is add, and then we are passing two values, right, which is t1 and t2. So these two values, they are request parameter, right? So how to fetch that value in the controller is with the help of request parameter, right? But for that we need to use this request object, response object. Instead of that, what we can do is, while you are sending values here, we can directly access those values in the method itself, you can simply say int I and int j. So the I value, so the t1 value should come to I and t2 value should come to j. That means we don't have to mention these two things. So it should happen automatically, right? Why you have to fetch the value and assign the value? Then how this will happen automatically is with the help of RequestParam attribute or annotation, in which you have to mention the name of the field, which is t1. So the value of t1 will go inside I, and the same thing we have to do for the second variable. So you have to say at RequestParam, and here we'll mention it is t2, right? So we have the second object as t2, right, and we'll give a space. So the t1 value will go into I and t2 value will go into j, and those I and j will go for the addition, right? So let's try to run this code after making some changes. So it will open in the Firefox now. I don't know what's happening with my Tomcat is running slow. So if I have 77 and 99, oh, that's weird, that's 99, and we got the output. Doesn't matter what the output is, what matters is these values are directly going into the variables with the help of at RequestParam annotation. Okay, so there are lots of annotations in Spring MVC. We have talked about the controller annotation. So basically, when you talk about controller, it comes under component. So controller annotation is a part of component annotation. So when you talk about this component annotation, it has three types. We have repository, we have controller, we have service, and controller is one of them. Then we can also provide the configuration with the help of add configuration annotation. We have add bean, and then we have this thing. So that's it from this Spring MVC video. We have talked about lots of things, right? So in the subsequent tutorials, we can talk about the different features of Spring. We can include in Spring MVC, like integration of Hibernate and all those stuffs. In this video, we are going to create a very simple Spring MVC application using Java-based configuration. Now again, when you make a Spring application, you can use XML, you can use annotations, or you can go for Java-based configuration. And in the earlier videos, we have talked about Spring MVC using annotations or using XML. In this video, let's see how to configure that with the help of Java-based configuration. So for that, what I will do is I will create a new project in my STS. Again, you can go for Eclipse as well, your choice. I'll be going for STS because it does provide some extra features for Spring applications. In fact, I will just change the perspective to STS here to Spring. So now let me create a project. I will say new, and I will create a Maven project. Again, you can go for dynamic web project, but then you have to do lots of configuration by yourself. Let's use Maven, and now I will say next. Now in this, you have to select web app project because you're making a web application. Click on next. Here you have to mention the project name. I can mention any project name. I will say this is Spring MVC Java. So this is Java based configuration. Yeah. So I will click on finish. The moment I do that, it will try to create a project, a Maven project for you. So where is that? You can see our project is here. Now it is giving you an error because I have not linked my Tomcat with this project yet. So let's do that quickly. So I will right click here. I will say properties, target runtime, select Tomcat here, and click on apply close. And you can see we have got rid of those errors. Now what I want is I just want to create a very simple application. So instead of going for a complex one, let's say I want to add two numbers, or maybe I want to just print hello world. So just to make it more simple, let's go for addition of two numbers. Because we are not concerned about logic here, we are concerned about how do we create a project. So we already have an index file, right? So in this index file, let me just create a form. So I will say form action. I will try to call add, yeah, and then this will accept two parameters. One is t1 and t2, and then we'll click on submit button. So let's do that quickly. Okay, so as you can see, I have just added two text field here, T1 and T2, and then clicking on submit. The moment I click on submit, it should it should send a request, right? And normally, if you do that in Servlet, what we do is we get a Servlet, and then we extend that Servlet with HTTP Servlet, and then we have to use two objects to fetch this value. Now, since we are working with Spring MVC, what we'll do is let's create a controller. Here we can say new, and I want to create a class, and that class would be what? Oh, first of all, I don't have a Java resource folder. Let's do that later. You can see it is going in a resource folder now. I just want to move that to a Java folder. If I say browse, will it give me option of creating a new folder? It's not giving that. Let's do that later then. I will just name this file as controller as add controller. Yeah, and then I will say okay, nothing fancy here, just click on finish. Now this is where it will give you a very simple class, but then to make it work as a controller, you just need to use an annotation called as add controller. So there's no need to extend any class or creating any specific method. You can simply say controller and your job will be done. So you have add controller. Oh, it's not working. It's because if you want to work with Spring annotations, you need a Spring jar files, right? And if you can see in this project, I have not added any jar file. It's missing. So how do you add those jar files? Just go to your Param XML file, and this is where you mention the jar files. Again, you can get these jar files from the Maven repository. Just go to Google and search for MV and repository, and by going there, you can search for Spring MVC. Instead of going there, what I will do is already have a copy with me. I will simply copy it from there and paste it here, just to save some time for this video. So you can see I have added a Spring MVC dependency, which is 4.3.12. You can go with any version, it will work. It may work depending upon when you're watching this video. So yeah, so this version works as of now. Now if I go back to the controller, if I say control space, you can see we got the import. Yeah. So once we have done with the controller, now we need a method who will take the request, right? So I would say my method name is public string. It will be add, which will add 2 numbers, of course, and it will take 2 parameters. Now how do you pass 2 parameters? Again, you can go with a very simple concept. You can create a request object, which is HTTP request object, and you can simply fetch the value. Otherwise, you can use some special feature of Spring. You can say RequestParam. Yeah, so I will say RequestParam, and the RequestParam value will be coming in the format of T1. So the T1, or not this T1, you will say the value will be coming in T1, and the value will be assigned to int, let's say I, or maybe num1. So in the value num1 will be assigned from T1. So whatever value you are sending from T1 will be assigned to num1. Now, if by any chance, if you are wondering what that T1 is, it is basically a name of the field in HTML. So if you can see, we have T1 and T2. So the same value will be assigned to num1 and num2 here. Now we just need to return a page name which you want to call. So after adding those 2 values, I will call a result page. I will say result.jsp. Technically, what you should be doing is, instead of returning a page name, of course you will be adding those 2 values. So you will say int k equal to num1 plus num2. So don't you think you have 2 things to return now? One is the value and second is the page name. Because this page will have nothing. It will simply have a design, of course, and the data will be depend upon this k. So as your k value changes, the data will change. So of course you cannot make a static content there. You need to make it dynamic. So how do you make a dynamic? That's a question, right? So what we will do is, instead of returning a string here, we can also specify that I want to go for a model and a view object. So we can achieve a model and view object here. So we can say model and view MV, because in this object you can specify both the things, the model, the view name and the data. So I will say model and view. So once we got this object, this k will be added. So we can simply say mv.add object, and we can assign the value of k, and we'll set that in maybe so I will say add object. I will say this is my result, and I would say I want to pass. So we're passing k with the help of a result key. Now, once you got this add object, we can simply specify the view name as well. So I'm trying to call a result.jsp. And again, you don't need to return now a string format. You can return MV, because this MV has both the things, the data and a view name. And you can simply specify, hey, I want to return a model view object, a model and a view object. Now, if you're wondering, you know, even if I return MV and it was string there, I was not getting any error. Why it is not giving you any error is because you're writing your Java code inside resource folder, and this mistake might happen when you work on a project. So make sure that all your Java files belongs to a Java folder. So what I will do is I will just create a new folder inside this, and I will name that folder as Java folder. So I will say here in src in main, I want to have a Java folder as well, which is missing in this case. I will say Java folder, and let's move this add controller here. Now you can see if I make any mistake, it will give you error, and we are getting error now. So it is num2. Thankfully, I've just moved it there so that I can see the errors. But it went to a default package. That's bad. It should be into some package, right? So I would say this is com.telusko. So I would say package com.telusko.web. Yeah, and then I just move it to that particular package. Done. So you can see in our this add controller, in this we got our controller. Everything seems good, right? But will this work? Of course it will not work because we don't have that page yet, which is result.jsp. Let's quickly make it. I will say, hey, I want a JSP page. It's JSP, and the name of this JSP page should be result.jsp, and I'll click on OK. In this, I just want to print the output. I would say result is colon, and here I would say dollar, and I would say result. So that's it. It's just, this is how you print data. But will it work? Of course not. But still, let's see what error is. So if I run this code, if I right click and run as run on server, I will say Tomcat server. I will click on finish. Okay, so this is where I got my output. Can you see that it is asking for two values? I would say 4 and 5. If I click on submit, hey, it's not working. Why it's not working? Let's verify by going to STS, and we have not got any problem here. The thing is, whenever you send a request, you have a very typical file here which is called as web.xml file, and this file is a main file for your application, right? This is where you define all the navigation, and unfortunately, I have not done any configuration. Now, first of all, we are not doing a normal servlet application. We are building a Spring MVC application. So here we have to mention, hey, web.xml file, if you get any request, just send it to DispatcherServlet. Now, if you remember in the Spring MVC theory video, I have talked about in Spring, you have a concept called a DispatcherServlet. DispatcherServlet is responsible to navigate the entire application. So it is your front controller, and we have not done that yet. So again, we can do that with XML, but I don't want to do that. I want to do that with Java configuration. So let's quickly do that. So if you don't want to work with the XML file anymore, what you can do is you can create a simple class, a very simple class. Right click, new, and I want a class, and I will name this class as my front controller. Again, you can name this class as anything you want, but this looks cool, right? My front controller. Now this class is responsible to load. So this class is responsible to mention, hey, this is the Spring application. This is a Spring application which is based on Java-based configuration. So how do you mention the configuration? It's very simple. Just to make it work, you simply need to extend a very small class name. Okay, when I say small, it's very big. So we have abstract. So class name is abstract, annotation, config, DispatcherServlet, initializer. Okay, you don't have to by heart this name. Normally when you work on a project, you can just simply copy it from anywhere. So yeah, so you just need to extend this class. So this is abstract annotation, abstract annotation, config, DispatcherServlet, and initializer. So what I will do is I will just write. So this is the abstract class basically. So it will ask you for certain parameters, certain methods to implement it. So I would say add unimplemented methods. Don't get scared looking at these three things. It's very easy actually. Now, if you remember, whenever you used to do the configuration in XML file, the web XML file, you need to specify the servlet mapping, right? For which request you need to use this application. And we used to always say, hey, for all the requests, doesn't matter, is it a request for a home page or a contact page, doesn't matter, you have to use the front controller. Now, in this case as well, how do you mention that for all the requests you have to use it? So since you can see the return type here is a string array, so of course we have to return something in a format of string array. So I would say new string array, and the values, since we have only one type of request which we are going to accept, which is all, so we simply say slash. So when I say slash, it means for all the requests, just use this my front controller. It's that simple. I guess that's it from this file. Now the second problem is, whenever you work with Spring applications, you need to configure some other things as well. Now when I say some other things, I'm talking about, we have a very unique file for every application. That is your something -servlet.xml file. There you specify the configuration for DispatcherServlet. And we don't have that XML file, right? And of course, we don't want to work with XML file. We want to work with Java configuration. So let's create a file which will replace the XML file from there. The file name is, let's say, MVC config. So let me repeat, we are trying to replace a configuration file, XML file for the DispatcherServlet. So in total, you have to get two configuration files. So this will replace your web XML file, and this will replace the DispatcherServlet XML configuration. Now in this class, you just need to extend one class to make it work, and that is extends web MVC. So this web MVC configure adapter. So this will help you in navigating your application. So now you're enabling that, hey, I'm using Spring MVC, but you have to also give the permission. So you have to use one more annotation here, which is enable web MVC. Now why we are using enable web MVC is because I want to use annotation based configuration. So again, you can manually specify all the beans here, or so if you want to specify all the beans, you have to create a bean for add controller as well. But if you can see, I'm using add controller here, right? So why you have to navigate it manually? So you can simply specify enable web MVC annotation. It will use annotations everywhere. That's the first annotation we have to mention. We have to mention one more. Now, if you remember, in the configuration file of XML, if you want me to show it, I guess I have an XML configuration example here. So if I say web app, web.inf, you can see that we use these two files whenever you want to configure with the help of XML. So we use a web XML file where you mention the mapping, yeah, and then we mention Telusko-Servlet where you mention the ComponentScan. So these two things are missing. So this thing is configured using MVC config. So we have to use one more by specifying the ComponentScan. So I would say ComponentScan, and here I will mention the package where you have all the things. So I will say com.Telusko. So com.Telusko has all the controllers. In fact, we have only one here, but we have to use that. And we have to mention that this is a configuration file. So I will say configuration. So on every class, on top of your every class, you have to mention something, a component, right? But in case of configuration, you just have to say configuration. Again, configuration and components are almost same, but this works. Yeah, that's it. You just need to mention these things, and you have configured everything. So this XML replacement, so the XML replacement here is this one, MVC configuration, and the web XML file replacement is this my controller. So we have done both the configuration, but with the help of Java-based. Okay, now only one thing is missing. The one thing is, now you can see we have created this configuration file, right? How would your my friend controller knows that this is the file you have to load? And that is what you have to mention here. Can you see that it is get root config classes? So you simply say, hey, I want to return a list of classes, array of classes, and if the class which I want to return here is, its name is, it's MVC config.class. That's it. We are good at this point. After doing all those settings, let me just restart my app, restart my server. I just hope it will work. And let's refresh. Let's one more say 3 and 4. And if I click on submit, it's not working. It says not going to disclose the one exist. Okay, what's wrong? Let's go back to the code. It says it is not able to map add. Why? But if you see, if in this, oh, I forgot one thing. Now every method need to have a request mapping, right? How it will map then? So we have to say request mapping. Now since we are using annotation, so this is what you do. And in here you mention whenever you get a request for add, this is what you have to call. It's that simple. Let's restart once again. And I will go back here and on my output page, on submit. And it worked. Oh my god, it worked, but then the value which we're expecting here is something, the value, right? 10, but we are not getting 10 there. So what's the mistake? Let's go back to our code. Sometime, you know, this is expression language, which is EL, and sometimes EL is not. So when you create a Maven project, by default, it will not give you support for EL, or it will ignore EL. You just need to say, hey, don't ignore EL. So you simply say is ignored false, is ignored. You have to say false. Now let's go back to the page and say submit, and you can see we got 10. So finally, our application is working, and we got the value which is 10. It's that simple. Yeah. So let me just go for a quick recap what we are trying to do here. We got index page where you're asking for 2 values. The request will go to the add controller where you are mentioning controller and mapping, and we are fetching the values using T1, T2. We are creating the object of model view because I want to send both the things, not just view name, but the data as well. So we got an object, we got a view, and we're returning it. But to handle this, we need a front controller, right? And so we have 2 choices. We can go for XML based configuration, or we can go for Java based configuration. In this example, I'm going for Java based. That's why I'm creating my own front controller which extends abstract annotation config DispatcherServlet initializer. You have another choice. We can go for web application initializer. It's just that we have to do lots of settings there. Using this, you just need to set minimum things, like you have to mention for which request you are accepting this, and what is your configuration file name. And the configuration file is here. In this, you are mentioning, hey, this is my package, but I have all the components, and I want to enable WebMVC annotations, and then this is a configuration file. That's it. Now, I'm also planning to make a video where I will be using a Spring MVC application with Hibernate, and that too with Java-based configuration. So till that point, if you enjoyed this video, click on the like button and do share this video with your friends. Thank you so much for watching.